Welcome to this week's episode of the American Serial Killer Guidebook with your intrepid hosts, Elton and Cherish Morgan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the American Serial Killer Guidebook. I'm your host, Elton Morgan.
And I'm Cherish Morgan.
And we're the Morgans. This week's episode will cover the crimes in the 40-year chase of one of America's most dangerous and thorough serial killer rapists. Joseph James DeAngelo, also known as the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, and the Golden State Killer, committed over 120 burglaries, raped over 50 women, and murdered 13 people during the course of his criminal career. What makes this even more insane is that for at least part of the time period when he was committing these crimes, he was a police officer, protecting and serving by day, and stealing, raping, and murdering by night. Make sure to continue listening to find out how deep down the rabbit hole DeAngelo took his depravity. Don't forget to find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and stop by our website at www.taskg.net. That's TASKG.net. On our website, you can listen to episodes, visit our blog, and follow and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And leave us a voicemail message via our new voice messaging system. That's the little microphone in the bottom right-hand corner. As always, you can email us directly at elton@taskg.net and cherish@taskg.net if you have any recommendations or information regarding case files you feel might be of use in our investigations and research into past or future episodes. If you've noticed the change in the audio quality of our podcast, it's because we have moved into our new studio and began using our new equipment. We will continue to improve our podcast to bring you all episodes of the highest quality to whet your appetites for murder and mayhem. Thanks again for tuning in this week, so let's get this murderous party started, shall we?
For over 40 years, Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. eluded authorities and escaped justice for his crimes. But thanks to modern investigative DNA practices, the Golden State Killer finally faced his day in court. DeAngelo was born in 1945 in Bath, New York, but moved around a lot during his early years due to his father being in the Air Force. In Germany, he lived life as an average 9-year-old boy until one tragic day, while living with his father, Joseph DeAngelo Sr., and mother Kathleen, along with 3 other siblings on the Air Force Base. DeAngelo witnessed 2 airmen rape his 7-year-old sister Constance in an abandoned warehouse on the base where they were playing. Some believe it was witnessing this trauma along with him and his siblings suffering physical abuse at the hands of their parents that caused something to break inside of DeAngelo, resulting in his need to first rob, then rape, and eventually evolving into a violent need to murder women after sexually assaulting them. It may have also played a part in his process of sneaking into the homes of couples, forcing the women to tie their husbands up and placing a stack of dishes on their backs while taking the women into another room to rape them. The entire time, knowing the husband knew what was happening in the next room, but unable to interfere because they were told if DeAngelo heard the dishes fall, then he would kill them both. DeAngelo moved to Sacramento, California in 1964 after his parents divorced. His mother, Kathleen, finally tired of Joseph Sr.'s abuse towards her and the children, so she took the kids and left. But Joseph Sr. decided if he couldn't have his current family, then he would just make a carbon copy of them. He moved to South Korea where he retired and married, having 3 more kids. The really strange part is that he named his new children exactly as he had his previous ones. His new kids were named Rebecca, Joseph Jr., and Constance. So there are literally 2 sets of kids from this man out there with the exact same names. How sick is that?
That's completely crazy. I can't imagine failing at one family, then deciding to move somewhere else, get someone else pregnant, have 3 kids, and name everybody the exact same names as your previous family.
How would that not be weird?
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I wonder how the kids feel about that, knowing that they're a second set. They're a backup pair or backup set of kids.
If they even knew about it, their previous children are married.
Oh, I'm sure they do now. With their half-brother being the Golden State Killer.
Yeah.
It's fucking nuts, man. That is nuts.
DeAngelo attended high school in Rancho Cordova from 1959 to 1964, when he decided to join the U.S. Navy. He ended up serving only 22 months during the war in Vietnam as a damage controlman on the cruiser USS Canberra and the destroyer USS Piedmont. He left the military on honorable discharge and attended Sierra College in 1969, where he graduated with honors with an associate's degree in police science. In 1970, while in college, he met and fell in love with his classmate Bonnie Jean Colwell, and by all accounts, he moved past love into the area of obsession. She began to notice that he was becoming more and more abusive, eventually deciding to break things off. But he then pulled a pistol and tried to force her to marry him at gunpoint. How the hell do you force someone to marry you at gunpoint?
I guess he was like, "I'm sorry, Reverend or Judge. Pay no attention to the pistol and tape over her mouth. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to be answering for her, so yes, she does."
That'd be a big old no. A year later, in 1971, he continued his education, enrolling at the University of California, Sacramento, where he graduated with a bachelor's in criminal justice, but continued with post-grad courses in police training at the College of the Sequoias, and followed things up with a police internship at the Roseville Police Department. I can't help but wonder if it was always part of his plan to use the skills he was learning in criminal justice and his police training to help him commit his crimes, or if he actually wanted to go into law enforcement to help people. Anyway, by 1973, he had found employment with the Exeter, California Police Department, where he worked in the burglary unit. In November of that same year, he married Sharon Marie Huddle, and the two purchased a home in Citrus Heights, California. Strangely enough, this is around the same time he began his career in crime as the Visalia Ransacker, where he would rob people's homes and ransack the place, meaning he would go through everything and tear the place apart. His fellow officers knew something wasn't right with him because when some of his old Exeter police colleagues were interviewed, they said he was considered a black sheep who never fit in, but they never expected him to be the secret monster that he was.
A short time later, he was promoted to sergeant in charge of the Joint Attack on Burglary Task Force, which means it is pretty much guaranteed that he was investigating his own crimes. I've said it before and I'll say it again. What is with the luck these guys get? I mean, he gets assigned to investigate his own burglaries and a damn promotion. I live an honest, hard-working life, and I don't get half the luck these fuckers get. In his earliest incarnation as the Visalia Ransacker, DeAngelo enjoyed being a peeping Tom. He liked to roam around neighborhoods at night, looking through windows until he found an empty house where he would break in and go through everything. I think this was more a part of his mental illness and evolving pathology than any attempt at making money, because he would ignore big money items like TVs, radios, etc. for smaller, less valuable items like personal trinkets and other things that only held sentimental value for their owners. In an effort to avoid getting caught in the act, he would place dishes, bottles, and other glass breakables against doors or balanced on doorknobs so that if someone attempted to enter, they would fall making noise, and that would give him time to head out the back. It's believed that he began committing burglaries as early as the late 60s, but the first officially reported crime attributed to him was a ransacking that took place on March 19, 1974. Although the Visalia Ransacker was noted for over 120 burglaries, there were some rapes in the area around the same time that many in law enforcement believe were committed by DeAngelo, but that he never confessed to. I mean, the guy confesses to 13 murders. Why the hell not confess to a few rapes and some burglaries? As with all maniacs of DeAngelo's caliber, his tastes began to evolve into more violent crimes. On the evening of the 11th of September, 1975, while a police officer with Exeter PD, Joseph DeAngelo Jr. graduated from burglary to attempted kidnapping and murder. While attempting to kidnap 16-year-old Elizabeth Snelling after being caught twice peeping into her bedroom by her dad, but getting away somehow, her father, 45-year-old journalism professor Claude Snelling, heard her screaming, and he came outside with a flashlight to confront the perpetrator. Okay, at this point, Claude Snelling shines the light in DeAngelo's face, and he's blinding him. Unfortunately, that's when DeAngelo fired 2 shots, killing Claude Snelling on the spot. He then turned to Elizabeth Snelling, who was lying on the ground. DeAngelo began kicking her in the head and face before running off into the darkness. And this is a 16-year-old girl he's kicking in the face. Up to this point, DeAngelo had been satisfied being the Visalia Ransacker and committing over 120 burglaries, but after whetting his appetite with the attempted kidnapping of Elizabeth Snelling and the murder of her father, He developed a taste for the more daring and violent crimes. A short 3 months after the Snelling fiasco on December 12, 1975, Detective William McGowan, who had been out patrolling neighborhoods, he spotted DeAngelo sneaking around a neighborhood. When confronted, DeAngelo pretended to give up, but then he pulled out his pistol and he shot at Detective McGowan, and luckily the only thing he hit was his flashlight, before once again disappearing into the darkness. That was the last known account of the Visalia Ransacker's nocturnal activities.
This was the summer of 1976 when DeAngelo decided it was time to switch jobs and change locations to Northern California. He left the Exeter Police Department to move 250 miles north to work for the Auburn Police Department, where he stayed for the next 3 years, terrifying his victims the entire time while having sworn an oath to protect and serve the citizens there. On June 18, 1976, DeAngelo committed his first documented rape in Sacramento County when he broke into the home of 22-year-old Phyllis Hinneman, no more Visalia Ransacker. Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. had begun his evolution into the East Area Rapist this time. According to Hinneman's victim impact statement, she was home alone because her dad was out of town and her mom had passed away 18 months prior. When she woke up around 4 a.m. to see DeAngelo standing in the doorway of her bedroom wearing a ski mask. He then jumped on her bed, holding a knife to her right temple, and proceeded to tie her up with a cord and a belt he had found in her closet. At this point, he gagged and raped her before ransacking her house, leaving her tied up on the bed, terrified and wondering if he was going to return and kill her. Phyllis Hinneman, after waiting to make sure he was really gone, and with her hands still tied behind her back so tightly they were going numb, she knocked over a telephone and managed to dial 0, having the operator call police. After reporting the encounter, she made a point of mentioning his use of a strange white mask that fit tightly. DeAngelo's first foray into houses with more than just women home began on October 18, 1976, when he broke into the Sacramento home of Winnie Schultz. Once inside, he tied her son Pete to the bedpost and locked her daughter in her room before binding and raping Mrs. Schultz like the impotent coward he is. 10 months and over 15 rapes later, 6 of which were teenage girls as young as 13, DeAngelo attacked his first couple on April 2, 1977, in Rancho Cordova, California. A little over a month later, on May 14, 1977, DeAngelo climbed in the back window of the home of Linda Odell and her husband, who had gone to bed around 2 a.m. Mrs. Odell said that she heard the bedroom door open, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a man with a flashlight climbing on top of her and throwing her some strings before telling her to tie up her husband. DeAngelo then tied her up and checked her husband, making sure their hands were bound behind their backs and their ankles were tied. He then went to the kitchen and came back with a stack of dishes that he placed on Mr. Odell's back and untied Linda's ankles, telling her to follow him. He took her to the family room where he cut a towel in half and turned on the TV, placing the towel piece over the screen, dampening the light, before telling her to lay down in front of the television. According to Miss Odell, he then decided to go to the fridge for a beer, then came back with a knife, raping her with it and held it to her throat. She said DeAngelo told her he'd kill her if she screamed or tried to get away, and if her husband made any noise, he would bring her his ear. Damn, that's some cold-ass controlling shit right there. For the next few hours, DeAngelo took his time rummaging through their house before finally deciding to leave, taking their wedding rings and her driver's license with him. Linda eventually managed to get loose and went back to check on her husband, whose hands had gone completely numb. She ran to a neighbor for help, who called 911, then came over and cut her husband's hands free.
DeAngelo continued to terrorize Sacramento County over the next few months, causing police to increase patrols, resulting in civilian patrols being formed as well in an attempt to catch him. Not only did his attacks continue, but he began taunting police by threatening to kill his next 2 victims. On September 6, 1977, DeAngelo decided to try his luck in neighboring Stockton, California, which caused an immediate response similar to Sacramento County, with police and citizens forming patrols to protect their neighborhoods. On February 2, 1978, Brian and Katie Maggiore were out enjoying the evening walking their dog when a gunman shot them to death. Some believe this was DeAngelo's first double murder due to its proximity to the prior rapes and the fact that a shoelace was found near the bodies, but no conclusive evidence has ever been produced, and he never confessed to the killings. Over the next 2 years, DeAngelo, at this time known as the East Area Rapist, and an active police officer with the Auburn PD, attacked and raped at least 30 more women, and couples across Modesto, Davis, Concord, San Ramon, San Jose, Fremont, and Walnut Creek, among other locations. On July 5, 1979, DeAngelo broke into the home of a woman who slept lighter than the others and woke up while he was putting on his mask. Screaming as loud as she could, she managed to chase him away. All right, two things happened in July of 1979 that may have contributed to the end of DeAngelo's time as the East Area Rapist. First, his last victim chased him away, and second, he got arrested for shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent, which he was more than likely going to use in his efforts to gain entry into more homes by overcoming any potential dogs. Being a police officer, his superiors didn't take his arrest lightly, and he was fired in addition to being sentenced to 6 months probation. The loss of his career as a police officer after the years of hard work that he put in, going to college and on the force, that left DeAngelo in a state of rage. To avoid the humiliation and the scrutiny of local law enforcement around the Auburn area, people he had worked with, he packed up his wife, moving to the greater Los Angeles area while maintaining ownership of their Citrus Heights home. By this point, raping and robbing was no longer going to satisfy the anger that had been building in him since childhood. On December 30th, 1979, Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. committed his first documented couple murder, killing Dr. Robert Offerman and his companion Deborah Manning in Offerman's Santa Barbara condo. Their shooting deaths were the catalyst to his metamorphosis into the original Night Stalker, not to be confused with serial killer Richard Ramirez, who came later. It's believed that Dr. Offerman managed to break free of his restraints and tried to fight back, leading DeAngelo to shoot and kill both him and Miss Manning. With their deaths, DeAngelo finally found the satisfaction he needed to feel in control of his life. The chaotic emotions that losing his career and livelihood finally felt manageable, and all he wanted was to feel that control again. It didn't take long for DeAngelo to scratch that itch, because a few months later, on March 13th, 1980, he did just that by breaking into the Ventura, California home of married couple 43-year-old Lyman and 33-year-old Charlene Smith. Once inside, he used a log from the fireplace to beat them to death, and upon later investigation, detectives observed their hands were tied with an uncommon knot called a diamond knot. In August of 1980, he snuck into newlywed couple Keith and Patricia Harrington's unlocked Laguna Niguel home just after 11 p.m. and tied them up. Once he was finished raping Patricia, rather than raid the fridge like he used to before ransacking the house, he covered the couple with blankets and beat them to death. Less than 6 months later, on February 5th, 1981, DeAngelo targeted 28-year-old Manuela Withen in her Irvine, California home while her husband was away. He broke in and raped her before bludgeoning her to death and leaving her to be found by her mother the next morning, wrapped in a sleeping bag. It didn't take long for Joseph DeAngelo Jr. to crave more victims. In the early morning hours of July 27th, 1981, he crept into the Goleta, California home where Greg Sanchez and Sherry Domingo were fast asleep. Their bodies were found the next morning by a real estate agent showing the house to prospective buyers, and they were both severely beaten, and Greg had been shot in the head in what appeared to be a struggle. I'm not sure how bad the struggle between Greg Sanchez and Joseph DeAngelo was, but it must have been pretty serious because DeAngelo didn't make another move until 5 years later, and it would be his last known crime. DeAngelo and his wife Sharon had their first daughter in 1981, so I think that her birth and the fight with Sanchez contributed to his need to avoid incarceration to raise his child, resulting in the 5-year hiatus until he murdered 18-year-old Janelle Cruz on May 4th, 1986, in her father's Irvine, California home. She was discovered the next day by a realtor who was selling the house for her father, and police reported that she was bludgeoned to death after being raped. DeAngelo's second daughter was born around the same time as Janelle Cruz's murder, while he and his family were living in Long Beach. In 1989, DeAngelo moved his family back to their Citrus Heights home and began working as a truck mechanic for the Save Mart Distribution Center in Roseville, and stayed there for 27 years until his retirement in 2017. He and his wife separated in 1991, with her taking the kids to live with her in nearby Roseville. DeAngelo spent the next 32 years living his life like a normal person. All right, going to work each day, spending time with his daughters, fishing, and doing all of the things that he deprived so many others of doing.
In January 2018, detectives identified Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. as a suspect when they submitted DNA collected from some of the original Night Stalker rape murders to the genomics website GEDmatch.com. A genealogist and FBI attorney managed to construct a family tree of the original Night Stalker's relatives, eventually narrowing down the list of suspects to DeAngelo himself. Investigators then collected a sample of DeAngelo's DNA from the door handle of his car, getting a match. On April 25, 2018, DeAngelo was arrested in his Citrus Heights home that he shared with his daughter and granddaughter, and the arresting officer said he had a look of profound surprise on his face. It was obvious that he'd never expected to be caught, much less held accountable for his crimes. True crime writer, the late Michelle McNamara, is credited with coining the name the Golden State Killer in her book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. One woman's obsessive search for the Golden State Killer. Prosecutors charged DeAngelo with 13 counts of murder and kidnapping, and on March 4, 2020, he agreed to plead guilty if the death penalty was taken off the table. June 29th, he pled guilty to all charges, and his sentencing on October 21st, 2020, he received 12 sentences of life without the possibility of parole plus 8 years. After he was sentenced, he apologized to his victims before they were allowed to stand up and say their victim impact statements to him, letting him know the extent of the pain and anguish he caused by his crimes. The kicker here is that his sentencing was held in the same University of Sacramento ballroom where he graduated in 1972. We hope you all enjoyed this week's episode learning about the life and crimes of Golden State Killer Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. Stop by our website at www.taskg.net, that's taskg.net, or find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to stay updated on serial killers we've covered or are planning to cover in future episodes. Don't forget to read our blog, and you can leave us a voicemail by clicking the microphone button on the lower right-hand side of our website. Tune in next week when we will be covering the sadistic crimes of Eileen Werenose, and we can be found everywhere that podcasts are listed, so don't miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and remember to help support our show by following the link in our episode description and transcript to get a free $20 Amazon gift card with every paid subscription to Buzzsprout that you can use towards equipment to help launch your own podcast. See you next week, folks!